Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Spiritual Journey podcast. My name is Nimesh and I'm your host. I always love starting every episode by saying thank you. I feel so blessed with this podcast, the people it reaches, the impact it has. Really started as a passion project. Just my objective was to simplify spirituality and guide people on their journey. And with the messages we get every week, and it's clearly doing that. I was given the nudge to start this podcast with a message from the Akashic Records, saying my voice, my gift. That's coming up to maybe 5 years ago now. It's crazy, and the growth, the support, the number of episodes. It's been a beautiful, beautiful ride. Feeling very, very blessed with it. I am an Akashic record reader, Akashic trainer, podcast host, podcast creator, as well as spiritual coach and mentor. And what I get to do is I get to guide people on their spiritual journey and get to hold their space while we're releasing all the layers we're holding on to truly understand why we're here, to help people kind of close out the karmic cycles. And because our veil of amnesia is thick when we're born, it gets thinner and thinner. I guide people, but nobody needs fixing, but I guide people to themselves. I love what I get to do. So if my voice resonates, reach out. And this podcast wouldn't be where it is today without my beautiful co-host, introducing the amazing, the stunning, the healer extraordinaire, and published author Stacey Brown. Stacey, over to you. Can you introduce yourself, please?
So good to be here. Thanks, friends. I'm so happy that we have this space, this platform to explore our spirituality, to understand a little bit more about who we are and why we're here. My name is Stacey. I'm an intuitive. I do readings for people from around the world. I am also an Akashic record reader and a spiritual coach and mentor. I have a special still going on right now, $44 for a reading with me. If you're interested, please reach out to me via my website or DM. And I have an amazing book out called Journey to Soul Center, Discovering the Gift of Surrender. It's available on Amazon and Audible. It is a powerful story and one that I feel honored to be able to share with you. So check it out. Looking forward to this episode today, Nims. How are you doing?
I'm good. Actually, we were just talking beforehand about how we're feeling, and honestly, the current energy, and we're still recording this between the eclipses. It is intense, right? We're to be honest. So I am feeling a little tired. I feel a little drained, but I'm here for it. Whatever's shifting, whatever's happening, for me individually, for the collective, I'm here for it. I chose this path, and I'm excited. So I'm looking forward to this episode and whatever comes through. So as I say quite often in our podcast, we tend not to pick topics too far in advance. We don't script anything, so whatever comes through comes through. We like to tap into the current energy. So today we're talking about authenticity over perfection, the real path of spiritual growth. And what does that really mean? I just feel like we're all putting ourselves under so much pressure on the spiritual path. We all kind of have a sense that something's shifting, something's coming, and we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And it's like, this path that we're on isn't linear. It kind of, as you've seen from your own experience, I'm sure, goes ups and down. And it's like, I feel like, our destiny, whatever's for us will find us, and whatever's not will miss us. But I don't, I'm not sure it's as simple as that. Sometimes there is diversions. There is, kind of sideways movements, or roadblocks, whatever it might. And it's just, but sometimes we try and be perfect, and it's that, it's the realization that there's no such thing as perfect, right? There's no right or wrong. It's on this journey, and it's that we put ourselves under so much pressure, and that's really what we're here to talk about. In that, the illusion of a perfect healer, mentor, or light worker, right? And just, I know from my own experience that when you mentor, when you guide, it's always a co-creation. So you're learning along the way. I always say, look, whatever I know, whatever I say, it's not mine. It comes from a different place. And staying grounded and watching out for spiritual ego and realizing that perfection doesn't exist really. It's just an illusion. And being gentle with yourself, and I do find that the universe, our guides, are a great leveler. They have this great habit of when we are putting ourselves on a pedestal in some kind of way, they do come along and remind us that we are human, right? There is a journey we're all on, and that's, as we start this episode, the best advice I can give you is that you're a student. You're going to continue to expand, and effectively, you know nothing, because things are changing, things are shifting so fast that whatever knowledge we have, it's all changing, it's all shifting, and we've got to make sure that we don't hold on to expectations. We don't hold on to what may be old knowledge, because everything we've learned so far is from the human, right? And whatever's coming next isn't going to come from the human mind. It's going to come from a different place. So staying grounded and being gentle with yourself, and just knowing that this path that we're on is being guided. And maybe we're not meant to know what's coming next. And maybe there's no such thing as perfect. I know, like I said, at times, I could probably go the other way. Actually, there's probably times I doubt myself rather than feel I'm perfect. But yeah, there's times, for example, when I'm reading the Akashic records, I'm not really there as a human, but I definitely try and stay grounded. And there's definitely been times on this human journey where I've kind of. It's interesting when all of a sudden you start to become more aware. You kind of wear it as a badge of honor, right? Oh my God, look, I know this. I know why this happened. I know why this happened. Look at me. How cool am I? Telling you from experience, awareness on its own isn't enough. You have to do something about that knowledge. And sometimes you got to keep it to yourself. Sometimes you got to share it. And but it's your journey. And your journey is very different to anyone else. And, ultimately, and I'm going to hand over to Stacey on this, because this is, for me, is a superpower, vulnerability, being authentic. It really is a it's a gateway to a deeper connection. It's a way to connect to people at a deeper level, but also to connect with you at a deeper level. Knowing that you're not perfect, actually, in its way, is a superpower. So, Stacey, how do you feel about this topic, in terms of being authentic over being perfect, and, the real path of spiritual growth, and kind of understanding you're not perfect, and being human, being vulnerable, sharing from the heart? I feel like that's one of your superpowers. So I'd love for you to share how that feels for you.
It's so interesting that it's viewed as a superpower, because when you're the person who is open and vulnerable, you can tend to feel like it's a weakness, that you're exposed, and what does that look like, and what are people going to think? But when I first started sharing my journey publicly, there was no filter, because I was in so much pain. And for those who don't know, several years ago, my 17-year-old son attempted to take his own life by running his car into a tree at 100 miles an hour. And when that initially happened, I crawled into a hole and I was hiding. I didn't want to share with people what was going on. Though the public around our community knew what was happening, I felt very private and didn't want to be exposed. And yet I felt exposed, and it was really challenging. And it took a couple of months for me to come to a place where I started using my voice again. And from that space, when I started using my voice again, it was like the filter that I had spent years building as an adult was blown to bits. And I no longer had that filter. I just had who I was and the pain that I was in, and sharing the journey that I was going through as openly as possible. And from that space, I've continued to share my voice in that way. And it's interesting because there are times where it doesn't feel like a choice. There's times where it feels like I'm just being prompted to openly share who I am. And I don't think about it until afterwards. And then afterwards, and this happens often with this podcast, afterwards, I'll be like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe I just shared that. But it it comes from a place of wanting to help people. You know, I really believe that we learn from each other's pain and we learn from each other's stories and we learn from each other's experiences. And it would be impossible to gain those lessons without talking about the times where we've stumbled or the times where we've been in pain. Those are the times where we have some of the biggest lessons. And there's part of me that feels like, who are we to decide to hide those experiences from other people if there's the potential for it to help them? And so I've kind of come from that place. Like, I've had so many life experiences, I've been through so many different phases of my life. And I've just kind of blown the lid off of um, putting up a like an image, you know what I mean? And saying like, this is who I am. And instead it's just been like, well, this is who I am. Here it is in my book, in the way I speak, in the way I do things. And, you know, I think there's power in letting people know that you don't have all the answers, and in being genuine and saying like, this is who I am and this is the life experience I've had, and I'm determined to help you in every way I possibly can, but it doesn't mean that I have all the answers. And I think it's done wonders for the relationships in my life because people know what they're getting into right off the bat, right? Whether it's a friendship, whether it's somebody that I'm mentoring, whatever the case may be, I'm so open with who I am that there's no image that I have to uphold. And I think that that can be very stressful, friends, if you kind of create this avatar or this image of who you are, and it's not actually who you are underneath the surface. That can create a whole level of stress because you're trying to be somebody that you're not. And people will eventually see through that. And I can't imagine the stress of that. You know, it's hard enough to show up as who you are and be open with that process, but it would be even harder to carry about an image of perfection or, you know, like, this is who I am, and try to uphold that. And so I'm grateful that I haven't done that and that I've stuck with being true to myself, even if it's uncomfortable. And I think that's one of the things that I want our listeners to know is it's not always easy to show up as who you are. It's not always easy to be open and vulnerable. But who could you help by being open about your journey? And I think that's the bigger question is, if you're feeling like you're here to serve and you're feeling like you're here to do something good in the world, why not show up as the most authentic version of yourself in order to give people your truth? And that for me is what I've tried to do in all that I'm doing. And like I said, I feel like I wasn't given a choice, Nims. It felt like this was just what I had to do. And it's what I've continued to do, is show up and show up as me. That's all I can do. And that's all any of us can do.
You know, it's interesting. Do we have a choice? You know, I feel in your example, you know, maybe whatever you went through forced you to kind of show up in the way that you are. But I do feel continuing to do that is maybe where the choice comes in, right? I totally get what you say about, when I say vulnerability is your superpower, it's kind of easier for me to see it. But yeah, when you're being vulnerable and when you're being, there's a rawness to it. There's you're being vulnerable. So it is, it's almost like all your layers and all your, whatever protection you have is just gone, and you're just authentically yourself. And, there is an uneasy feeling like that, but there's also just such a powerful feeling for it. And it just, like I said, it's easier for probably people to see it on the outside, but then when you're doing it, but that definitely is a, sharing from the heart. I mean, we connected because you were sharing so vulnerably many years ago on an app called Clubhouse. And I was like, wow, I don't see people sharing that vulnerably that often. I don't hear it. So I just had to come and say congratulations. And that led us down a path. So, vulnerability, as you say, people connect to it. People connect to you. People feel your energy and your vibration and you being authentic. And there's a fine line between vulnerable and trauma dumping, right? I mean, your story and the trauma you've been through, it sure is your story. But it's not necessarily about your story. It's about what you got from your story and how that expanded you and kind of brought you on this journey. It's the lessons that you learned from it. Because, I've seen people trauma dump, right? Oh, my traumas were worse than yours and all that. And who say it is or isn't, but it's not the point. Being vulnerable and sharing from the heart is allowing people to see who you are, but also to see your strength and your power. And so, just a reminder that being vulnerable, being authentic isn't necessarily the same as sharing your trauma. And people do connect when you share with your trauma, but it really is about what's the lesson from that trauma would be what I'd say. And, what you were saying, it's like you were reading my mind about avatars and kind of the images that we create. On social media, wherever that looks like, we work, so many people work hard to create this image of who they think they should be or who people want us to be in. As you said, it's kind of hard, if you try and keep up that facade, it's just, and eventually maybe you start kidding yourself. Maybe that's where you start hiding. So I remember when I was still in the corporate space, but I was starting this spiritual journey, and I was debating, I wanted to be more seen on social media, and I wanted to be more heard. And I was like, but hold on, all these people from work in the corporate space follow me. If I start all of a sudden start talking about, Dark Night of the Soul, Akashic Records, and, things like that, what are people going to think? And I always remember a phrase that Sidra used to use a lot, and I use it a lot now too. How you do one thing is how you do everything. And just thinking about that phrase helped me to understand that actually the values I have, whether they're in the corporate space or whether in this healing space, they're consistent. So I just decided to merge worlds. I didn't create another profile. I just started showing up and speaking as me. I am who I am, right? I mean, social media still feels a bit alien to me in terms of just, reaching out to people that way, but it's not daunting to me anymore. So if I want to show up, I'll show up, but it's that. But I would recommend being authentic with yourself first. Because sometimes we do kid ourselves, right? Sometimes we do, it's our ego kind of wanting to keep safe. So having an honest conversation with yourself about where you're at, what frustrates you, how you're showing up. And as I say that, it starts raining and there's thunderstorms around me. So maybe there's some truth there. I'm not sure. But having that honest conversation with yourself is something I'd definitely recommend. Then asking yourself, how are you showing up? Are you showing up authentically? Or are you creating a facade? Because sometimes we compare ourselves to other people. Look at this person, look at what they've achieved. And you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. You don't know what's happening in their world. So I would the only person you can compare yourself to is yourself. Because no one else has led your life. No one else has been on your journey. So have that honest conversation with yourself in the mirror. Are you being authentic? How are you showing up? My deal with God and my guides is always, I'm just going to keep showing up. whatever that looks like, I'm just going to keep showing up. Wherever I feel I need to go, wherever I feel I'm being sent, I'm just going to show up. And the other thing I try and do to stay grounded is realize that whatever knowledge I have, whatever information I have, whatever I share isn't mine. It comes from a different space. So knowing that, this is the vessel for your soul, and knowing that whatever comes through isn't yours, it comes from a different place, is also quite humbling. And staying grounded, being aware of spiritual ego, being aware that you're a student, you're always going to be learning. If anyone that says that they're fully healed, I would smile, because I don't really believe anybody's fully healed. I believe that there are levels of healing, and things come up when we're ready to heal them. And I feel like we're always being students. And if you take that mentality of I'm a student, whatever I'm going to go through today is part of my expansion, is part of my learning. And the most dangerous words in the English language, Sid always used to say, is I know. So as soon as you say the words I know, what you're doing is you're stopping yourself from additional expansion with whatever you know. It's just a really interesting, especially right now. I feel like we're putting so much pressure on ourselves. I talk a lot about it's time for you to, it's time for you to be seen. It's time for you to be heard. And I agree with that. But I would add, it's time for you to be seen and heard authentically as yourself, warts and all. People need to hear that life isn't perfect, but we're on this track. That helps. How do you feel about showing up on social media and kind of being seen and being honest with yourself and the people around you, Stacey?
It's interesting that this part of things is coming up, because I feel like lately I've been holding back on social media. And a huge part of it, if I'm being open about where I am, a huge part of it is I'm in this really uncomfortable season right now where I am kind of in between two worlds, and I'm, anxiously waiting on a visa to move to the UK. And I'm in this weird, like, kind of transitionary period. And it feels really uncomfortable to me. Like it really feels foreign and awkward and uncertain. And there are days where I wake up and I feel peaceful, and there are days where I wake up and I want to cry. And I'm not quite sure what part of this part of my journey, I'm not quite sure what part to share. You know what I mean? Like I feel, I don't know. I look at everybody's social media, and this is me comparing, right? You're going to hear me compare. I see like all these beautiful moments happening and stuff like that. And I don't want to put negativity out there. And so I'm churning about what to share and what not to share on social media, because it is such a different space to be in right now. And because it feels so uncomfortable and awkward to me, I'm not sure how to not come across as uncomfortable and awkward in my sharing. And so I've been choosing to share a lot of my journey here on the podcast as opposed to on my social media. It's just kind of happened because this is a space where we're having conversation and I can be open about it. And a lot of times I'm not thinking about what I'm going to say before I say it when we do these episodes. Nothing that we do is scripted. It's all just real-time conversation. And so I find myself sharing a lot of the inner workings of what's going on here in this space and kind of holding back on my social media. And like I said, I think it's because I'm not comfortable with the season that I'm in. So, how do I properly share when I'm kind of having a bit of an identity crisis? And so, I think the time is coming that I will share more on my social media about what's going on or what I've been through, but I feel like I'm still getting clear on where I am and how it's impacting me and how I'm going to show up after this. Like, I think there's a lot of uncertainty that I'm still figuring out behind the scenes. And so I choose to share that here as opposed to my social media. But I feel as I'm figuring it out and as I'm navigating it, I will slowly start to share more on my social media. Have I shared openly and authentically stuff that's happened on my journey? 100% yes. But this particular season, I'm holding back a little bit. And I think it's because I'm still trying to understand it myself. And until I become somewhat clear on that, I'm not ready to share it there in that space. It's like I want to understand a little bit more.
Honestly, that's okay, right? I mean,
Yeah.
how we show up, what we share, and is up to us. But it's interesting. I'm sure there's a lot of people listening that can relate to, maybe not to the extreme that you're sharing in terms of even where you're going to live, but can relate to this season being transitional. We're not even sure where we're at and what's going through, what's happening next, and what do you share, what don't you share, and I mean, I can relate. I mean, a lot of my social media stuff is sharing whatever wisdom's coming through, but in terms of my transitions and what's going through, I can feel things shifting. I don't know what they are, so what do I share about it? I just share what I feel is going on energetically, because I feel that's what I'm going through too, and that's kind of my intention. But I just feel whatever people are sharing right now is their truth, and but I do feel if you check in with the energy of the planet, everybody's going through something. Some people are sharing it, and some people are not, and that's okay. There's no right or wrong. Some people are so focused on their business and their image, and they want to maintain it, right? And sometimes we're trying to hold on to our old self, and Stacey, I've heard you talk about your story. I mean, yes, on this podcast, but also on social media, and you've always been authentic. But I also get that sometimes it's like, well, you don't know what's coming next, and you've already shared that you don't know, and you're in a transition. So it's like, I'm sure there's a part. It's like, what's the point in talking? There's nothing new I've got to share, but I do appreciate you sharing authentically on this podcast, and because there is a transition, right? Even if it's because this is the thing about the spiritual journey. A lot of the time, it won't show up externally straight away because the work that you're doing is internal. So, when we share, when we're going through a transition, at least when you share, things have shifted, right? They may not feel it externally, but I do feel like we're all going through a shift. I feel like this energy, this vibration is different. And don't compare yourself to, and this is to our listeners, to what people share on social media, because again, is it authentic? Only you can feel that in your heart. Is there stuff happening behind the scenes? Probably. Does it need to be shared? It's the individual's choice. I always remember Sidra used to call Facebook fake book, because it is sometimes, right? But maybe it's also a form of manifestation, right? Maybe you talk about what life you want to be, but I would just say, like I said earlier, starting with an authentic conversation with yourself and honest, because sometimes we kid ourselves. And being honest with how you feel about you and where you're at, sharing your fears. And the second thing is look for a safe space, look for a community, or maybe a close friend that there is going to hold your space, isn't going to judge you, that's going to allow you to be. And if you haven't got that, then manifest it. Look for a community, look for a safe space for you to share. And I feel like every week in this podcast, we always talk about self-care and the importance of it. But even in this, you understanding where you're at and being authentic with it. And that also comes from you having strong spiritual practices, which allows you to be present, which allows you to to understand that you're not kidding yourself. You're not portraying an image which isn't true. And because sometimes what happens is the work that we do raises our vibration and it prepares us for the dips. So doing that self-care also prepares you for whatever's coming next. And what do I mean by self-care is time in nature, time in meditation, time just being silent with you, getting to know you, journaling. You know, if you struggle to spend time with you, then for me that means there's something ready to heal that you're holding in. Spend time with you, get to know this version of you. It's so important. Stacey, I know you love talking about this one too. What would you advise people who are, striving to be authentic and realizing that they're not perfect? What would be what practices do you use? What would you advise?
So this is a little bit challenging for me because my openness and my vulnerability, my authenticity, and my ability to share came from a traumatic experience that kind of blew the lid off of it. With that being said, I do regular check-ins with myself to see, am I living in alignment with what I believe? Am I being true to myself? And I think those check-ins are really important. Whether you do it through journaling, whether you do it with a friend, whether you do it through a mentor, a confidant, I feel like having that accountability is really important, especially when you're putting yourself out there on a platform like this, right? Where you're using your voice and impacting hundreds of people at a time. It's really, really important that you remain true to yourself in what you're sharing, because at some point that could all come tumbling down if you're not. So my advice would be to check in with yourself. And if you can't have that open and real conversation with yourself through writing and introspection, then reach out to somebody that you trust and have that conversation. Am I showing up as the truest version of myself in everything I'm doing? And if the answer is no, what do you need to do differently? I think so many of us are afraid to show our weaknesses or to show our vulnerability because we look at it as a weakness. But I think if we can reframe it and look at it as a superpower or a strength, it can give us the courage to show up in a different way and to show up as ourselves. From that space, when we're showing up as ourselves, that's where we can really make an impact, because we're not trying to be perfect. We're showing people the mistakes that we've made along the way, and we're openly sharing how we got to where we are. And that's what people need, right? Imagine that we're all in a race, right? We're all in a race. We're all in a marathon. We're all trying to get to the same place. We're all trying to get to the finish line. Some of us might be a little bit further along in the race than others. We might be a couple miles ahead. But I feel like we have a responsibility to turn around to the people who are coming behind us and warn them when there's a big hill ahead, or warn them when there's a challenging spot in the race, and let them know what we've learned along the way to hopefully make their journey a little bit easier. And so I kind of look at my life that way. Like, if I've had to go through these lessons and I've had these learning experiences, what would it mean to somebody else going through this process if I shared what I've learned through my experiences? And it's very empowering when you reframe it and you look at it as something that is a strength instead of a weakness. And so I think mindset is a huge, huge part of this, right? If you can look at things from the space of this is a strength, not a weakness, then you're more likely to share the inner workings of who you are with the world in whatever way you decide. But I think if your mindset is this makes me weak, or this is showing that I'm not as strong as people thought I was, or what have you, that's where we're then going to hold back. So I think it starts with your mindset and then asking yourself some really tough questions about how you're showing up.
I love that because, the questions we ask ourselves, the mindset, the conversations we have in our is so powerful. And I'll always talk about changing your question, because if your response to things, I knew this was going to happen, it always happens to me, it's not really a quality question. We're a soul having a human experience, which means that anything we experience is something that can expand us. So when you start asking, well, hold on, how is this expanding me? How is this helping me? Why did my soul choose this path? Because whatever you're going through, it is part of your human expansion, right? It is part of what your soul chose you. So I couldn't agree more. Reframing and changing your question is so, so powerful, because what if there's no such thing as good or bad, making a mistake or being perfect? Because if you go back and you think about what you may have felt is a mistake, or what maybe one of your most painful experiences, you realize that the expansion you got from what may have felt like a mistake. You learn more from your falls, and I'm sure you heard it before. You learn more from your mistakes when you fall than when you do when everything's going perfect. It's the universe teaching you, and it does take courage to be seen and to be heard and to be vulnerable. But when I talk about, I feel like we've been asked to be seen and to be heard, that's what I mean. Is to speak your truth with love, to speak your truth with humility, knowing that you don't know everything. You don't, there's lots still to learn. And, just sometimes we're so worried about falling or making a mistake, and that's our ego. What if from those mistakes is where your breakthrough comes from? What if playing safe is actually stopping you from expanding and really experiencing this world? Being kind to yourself, being compassionate, knowing and accepting that you're human. I mean, I think about all the things that have happened in public recently. The Coldplay concert is an example. It's like, well, that whole experience has changed those people's worlds, right? What it's taught them, I mean, that's their journey, but it feels like that was part of the soul contract, right? That was part of who knows why those happened. Maybe those relationships needed to come to an end for that soul contract to complete. And if that didn't happen, that soul contract may have not completed in that way. So you don't know why certain setbacks and certain mistakes happen, but if you're open to them teaching you a lesson, because they are sacred teachers, the universe, our guides, have a role to play to guide us, to teach us, to hold our space. Which for me, I say this quite often, I really do feel whatever happens to us is serving us in some kind of way. And I get that's sometimes difficult to hear. If you're going through something and it's really intense, it's really painful, and you have someone like me that comes along and says everything that happens to you is serving in some kind of way, it's hard to hear that. Why would my soul pick such a challenging journey? Why would it pick so much pain? Well, one, I'd say to you, because you can handle it and your soul can. Two, is because the karma you chose to release in this life has to be associated to that pain. And so that if you, again, change the question like we've been talking about, then all of a sudden maybe your awareness starts to increase, and from there you can start to shift. Your soul chose an imperfect life, right? There's no such thing as perfect. Who are you to even think that your life's perfect? Because it's a transition. I'll always think of the phrase, this too shall pass. It means that if things are going maybe not on the path that you expected and you're frustrated, then know and accept this too shall pass. It's a phase. But the same also applies when things are on a high. This too shall pass. I'm not saying you won't continue on a high, but there'll be a different high. Just an interesting, the more curious you can be about your journey, the more, I love the phrase, what other people think of me is none of my business. The more you can let go of this facade, this image of what you feel people think about you, the easier. And I get that's not that easy, right? You've created this facade, you worry about what people think. But again, and if you're being authentic, if people can't relate to that, then maybe they're the wrong people. So be gentle, be kind. Change your question, hold your space, self-care. Just, it's such an interesting time for us to be really look in the mirror and have an honest conversation. That's what I'd always recommend and that's what I always try and do is I'll look in the mirror and have an honest conversation. Or the other thing I'll do is I'll talk to my soul. I'll call out my higher self or my soul and just have a conversation. And sometimes it's an angry conversation. Sometimes it's a swearing conversation. Sometimes it's a gentle conversation. But just being gentle with yourself, knowing that this journey isn't meant to be perfect, but that's the point. You're a soul having human experience. So the more you can embrace it, the more that you can be kind to you, the better. So Stacey, as we get into the end of this episode, I'm going to ask you about any kind of journal prompts, any final bits of advice you have. Please do share.
So if you have a journal, I would encourage you to grab it and ask yourself the first question, how am I showing up in the world? And just see what you write down. See what comes up, see what comes to the surface. Are you showing up as the most authentic version of yourself? And if you aren't, where are you holding back and why? And really get real with yourself about what is making you feel like you cannot be open with the world in whatever way about who you are. And again, this doesn't mean that you're shouting from the rooftops your whole life experience. But if you're holding back in certain platforms where you feel prompted to share who you are, why are you holding back? What is the reason behind that? And if you're not a journaler, try to go to somebody that's a trusted confidant and have this interaction with them. Allow them to act as a sounding board and give you some feedback if you need it, or allow you a space to process some of the things that are coming up for you that are the reason why you're not showing up as that most authentic version of yourself. Give yourself that space to figure out why. Whether you do it alone, independently with your journal, or with somebody that's close to you, I encourage you to take these steps and figure out what is holding you back from sharing who you are with the world in whatever way you're meant to. My friends, I want you to know that I don't believe that our pain is ever meant to be wasted. I believe that when we go through experiences, we are meant to impart that wisdom to those coming after us. And for me, that has brought me a lot of peace through the experiences that I've been through, because it's allowed me to understand that it is not just about me, that the experiences I'm going through could have an impact on someone else if I choose to share those experiences. So I hope this episode helps you on your healing journey. It's been an honor to be here in this space.
Thank you for that, Stace. Very, very wise advice. And I'm sure there's people listening say, well, I'm not really into journaling. I'm not sure I have anybody in my world that I can speak to authentically. Then one, I'd say maybe manifest it and ask for it. Two, the other thing, I'm not a huge journaler all the time, but what I like to do sometimes is just record myself a voice note. Because sometimes talking it out, this is why we say talk to somebody, a trusted confidant. If you don't feel like you have that, then record yourself a voice note. Just talk it out. Maybe that helps. We're just giving you all these options. You just got to pick the one that makes sense. And by the way, it's a sign of strength asking for help. So calling out and speaking to a trusted friend. And we'd always say if you feel like you need a therapist, you need professional help, then make sure you get that too. If you feel like you need a guide, you need a mentor to hold your space, then again, reach out to us. We have a beautiful mentorship program. You can work with us, both of us together, individually, whatever feels right. It's a soul contract. But I'm telling you, what we do is we create a safe space for you to be. My intention is I'll never like to tell anybody what to do, because who am I to tell? But I'd like to create a safe space where I hold space for people to be vulnerable, to be honest. So if that appeals, reach out. We'd love to take you through what we do. This is such an interesting topic. It's And the biggest thing I can tell you is just be gentle with yourself. Being authentic isn't about getting it right. It's about showing up as you are, and you're perfect in this moment as you are. Nobody needs fixing. Showing up with honesty, courage, compassion. Ultimately, perfection is an illusion. Who is perfect? Anyone that thinks they are, I feel like the universe is going to show a mirror very soon. But you're needed, you're wanted, your presence is really real. Trust that your light shines brightest when you embrace your humanness. What other people think of you is none of your business. So your vulnerability and your soul's truth is so important. This is what our intention is with this podcast every week, is to show up as ourselves, to show up whatever information comes through. I love Stacey's vulnerability and the power that she has with it. And I hopefully you feel my energy, my intention is to show up as I am, to share whatever truth comes through me. I just love this platform to share that. So thank you, Stacey, as always, for being so vulnerable, for sharing from the heart. Thank you to all our listeners. I'm sending you so much love and light, and the biggest hug. Thank you. Bye for now.